Pocket hole time. This simple tool changed woodworking forever, but this joinery method has been around way before these jigs ever come along. Pocket hole joinery could be one of the greatest inventions ever made for woodworking, and I'm going to prove it in this video. This is one of the greatest things that ever happened to me in my woodworking journey, is discovering pocket holes, because it opened the door for a beginner to start doing joinery methods that were not possible without a lot of practice and skill. And it's also used by a lot of professional woodworkers in many different ways. In this video, we're going to debunk the myths or the lies that you've been told about pocket hole joinery being too weak, that they're only for beginners, that they don't look good, or whatever else you've been told, that people just don't like pocket holes. It's all nonsense in my opinion. I'm also going to show you some tips and tricks to get the best results for pocket holes, and we're also going to go over the do's and don'ts of pocket hole joinery. And then I'll share some accessories that are must-haves for pocket hole joinery. Let's go. Before we get started, if you'd like to check out any of the tools or supplies that I show today, I'll link those in the description and the pinned comment to help you find them easier. Now, pocket hole joinery is not a new thing. It's not something that just come along in the 1990s or the 2000s. This has been around since the 1800s. For a few hundred years, woodworkers have been using pocket hole joinery to join wood together in some form or fashion. And you can even find pocket hole joinery in antique furniture if you just look. Now, obviously, pocket hole joinery has evolved over the centuries, because now we have these amazing jigs that pretty much are set it and forget it and go. Very easy to use. We'll talk about them later. But before, literally, they had hand drills that they would drill with a special bit sideways or at an angle to get that pocket hole. And that's what these jigs do now. Since the 1980s, 90s area, we've had these jigs that really do help level up things. And if you don't like manual jigs, there's even some automatic jigs that you can use, like the Craig Foreman, and I think there's one called a Castle jig. I'll link to both of those in the description. If you're drilling a ton of pocket holes and you're making a lot of cabinets and things like that, those are probably nice investments to have. But for most of us, beginners to intermediate woodworkers, these jigs are great. So when I first started woodworking, I didn't have a clue what I was doing, not really. I would just cut the wood and put it together, and essentially that's all woodworking is. You cut a piece of wood or cut two pieces of wood and join them together, you've built something, or you've started to build something. Don't make it overcomplicated. If you do that, you're now a woodworker. That's all it takes. So when I started woodworking, I literally was building these outdoor chairs, and I would just screw from the top down into the next piece of wood. And while that was okay, it didn't look the greatest. And when I discovered pocket holes, it just opened up a world for me, because it opened up joinery that was never possible before. Because as a beginner, I wasn't skilled enough or even had the knowledge to be able to start doing mortise and tenon or any other type of joinery that could be used on different furniture pieces. So when I've discovered a pocket hole jig, it literally changed my life forever. Because while even professional woodworkers use pocket hole joinery, this is the perfect, in my opinion, the perfect joinery method for beginner woodworkers, because it's easily accessible and it's very easy to learn. And you can create some absolutely amazing products or projects with pocket holes. And I'll show you a few later. Pocket hole joinery leveled up my woodworking because I was able to provide a better looking product to my customer, and it helped me work more efficiently and building more products than I ever thought possible with a joinery method that's so easy to get into. Now, over the years, I've built dozens and dozens and dozens of products using pocket hole joinery. I'm talking everything from coffee tables, end tables, shop furniture like this workbench that's been here for a few years now, miter station, router table, my shop cart, even dining tables, coffee bars, and tons of other stuff using just pocket hole joinery. We even redid our entire closet using pocket hole joinery. Now, there's quite a few lies or misinformation, I think, on the internet about pocket hole joinery being too weak to use in furniture. I've used it for years in a variety of furniture, as I've mentioned before, and I think they are perfect for beginners, even intermediate woodworkers, and I've sold literally thousands of dollars worth of products using pocket hole joinery. So it's a viable joinery method, no matter what the haters want to say in the comments or tell you on the internet. Early on, I built a set of bar stools. I built 3 of them. I found the plans from DIY Pete. I'll link to his video in the description. Very easy to use, just 2x4s and pocket holes. That's it. And they are super strong. Now, you want to use glue in your joints where the 2 boards are coming together, but the pocket holes are there as well. I really take these bar stools and set them right where the camera's at right now, and I set on it, it's fine. We sat on them for hundreds of hours. One of my favorite places to sit is at the bar. We eat at the bar, we play on the iPad at the bar, we watch TV from the bar. It's just one of those things where it's just a place for the family to hang out. And these chairs have lasted for years and years. And when we talk about strength, people say they're too weak. I'm 205 pounds on a good day if I don't eat cake.
Cake is my weakness.
You see me standing here on the side of the apron of this bar stool, literally bouncing up and down. Nothing happens. It's fine. Take this little end table, for example. I sat on the end table. Again, 205 pounds on the top of this end table. It's pine and it's pocket holes. Two things you're told are weak and not good to build furniture out of. It's nonsense. Pine is fine. One thing to remember about this is you see a lot of strength tests on YouTube about different joinery methods, and they take two pieces of boards and they put them together and then they break them. That's not realistic when you look at your projects. When you look at something like the bar stools, that apron that's running between the two legs is not subject to that type of force. There's two connection points, and the only force is going to be on there is when someone steps on it or climbs on it or whatever. And typically, a grown person's not going to climb on the side of it like that anyway. But even if they do, it's fine. It's not going to go anywhere. And if you look at end tables and coffee tables and things like that, the heaviest thing that's going to go on there is probably a kid if they climb on there. 20, 30, 40 pounds. Or maybe a TV stand is holding a TV. Weighs what, 40, 50 pounds. You're not holding tons of weight. And so these ideas that this thing has to be some thousands of pounds of strength to keep from breaking, that you can't build furniture out of it, is nonsense. You can do it with pocket holes and pine. Another myth is you shouldn't use pocket hole joinery for outdoor projects because they're not strong enough. Okay, I've built an outdoor bench, I built an outdoor sectional, I built an outdoor chair, and I've built an outdoor storage box. All open to the rain, the snow, the ice, the sun. They're several years old now, perfectly fine. Nothing wrong with them, still look great, still holding up, still using them to this day on my deck. So I think that's can be debunked as well. Another myth or lie is that the pocket hole is an unprofessional joinery method. And while there are better looking joinery methods, there's a lot of times where you don't even know that the pocket holes are there unless you turn the piece upside down, because most of your pocket hole joinery is going to be underneath anyway. So a lot of times that's just not even a good point in my opinion. And then the last myth I think is that they're only for beginner woodworkers. There's professional woodworkers using pocket hole joinery in some ways, especially cabinets, things like that. Not that professionals are building furniture, end tables, dining tables, that kind of thing with pocket holes, but they are still using them in various ways. And speaking of that, there are some places you would want to use pocket holes and some that you probably would not want to use pocket holes. Some of the best uses for pocket holes, again, is cabinets, like my miter station, the router table, even my closet rebuild, or even this workbench here. Plywood construction, AKA cabinets type stuff, is perfect for pocket holes. You can also use them in face frames. In other words, if you're facing out cabinets, so still cabinetry, shop projects, and even furniture like I have stated before. Now, where would you not want to use pocket hole joinery? Well, if it's going to be visible in a bunch of different places, maybe not the best choice, depending on what aesthetic you're going for. For instance, fine woodworking or fine furniture making, not gonna really wanna pick pocket holes for that. And high stress areas, like there's going to be a lot of stress or a lot of tension on that joint, then the pocket hole joint is probably not the best option. So what pocket hole jig do you buy to do pocket hole joinery? Well, you can go as simple and as budget friendly as something like this. This is the little Masca twin jig. We sell this on our website at faithvalleytools.com, along with a lot of this pocket hole jig stuff that you'll see today. This is very inexpensive, and all you do is clamp this to the board and you can drill holes with it, and it's great. I started with something very similar to this, and I found out really fast, while these are handy and great to have to get into tight spaces and places where these jigs won't get, you should have one of these, but it's not the end all be all, because what you'll find is having a jig with a built-in clamp is way faster and a lot easier to use. And if you're looking at a pocket hole jig with a built-in clamp, there's really two that I recommend if you're going to be buying it. First, the Masca Pro. I love this jig. I think it's one of the best built jigs on the market. And then also the Craig 720 Pro. I think they have one under this that's okay too. Those are the two you're probably going to be looking at. Now, I like the Masca because it's solid aluminum. There's all metal. It's no plastic. And that's one of the complaints I have with the Craig, is there's a lot of plastic parts and pieces on there. The Craig's fine. It'll drill pocket holes just the same but I do like the Masca jig. And we sell this one on the Faith Valley Tools along with this mounting board, so you can keep up with everything, your drill bits, your driver bits, any Allen keys that you may need. And I do like the Masca jig because it does have those supporting wings that you can use to help support your material. One great thing about the Masca pocket hole jig is you can take this block off and use it as a standalone or a portable pocket hole jig. I had to do that on my deck railing because the railing was just too long to stand up in this jig, so that's also a nice feature to have. Now, a few things I do really like about the Craig jig is it has an auto clamp, so it auto adjusts, so you don't actually have to set it. Not that that's a big deal, but it is convenient for some. I also like that there's storage on the back side of this for your drill bits and driver bit and things like that. It doesn't really matter which one of these jigs you go with, the Masca or the Craig. I think you'll be happy either way, but I'll link to both in the description for you. Pocket hole time. Now, I've literally drilled thousands of pocket holes. I would love to know the number of pocket holes that I've drilled in my lifetime. I've built and sold hundreds of stove covers, dozens of end tables and coffee tables, and a number of other shop projects that I've done. I'm a pocket hole professional just by sheer experience. Now I'm gonna share with you some tips and tricks that will save you a lot of frustration that I had to go through trying to learn how to use pocket hole joinery the right way. I have yet to have any of my projects fail from pocket hole joinery. We're still using several of these pieces in the house. Some my kids have taken to their new homes that they're still using. They're all still in existence. They're all still functioning perfectly fine. And you can build any of them yourself using my step-by-step, easy to follow plans. If you want to check those out, go to 731woodworks.com/store. If you use the code POCKETHOLETIME, all one word, Pocket Hole Time, I'll give you 20% off any order or any bundle that's already discounted. Go check them out, start building. Now let me show you some tips and tricks. Now, one of the most common questions I get about pocket holes is about the screws themselves. Now, there's a size chart that will tell you what size screw to use with what size material from Craig. I'll prop that on the screen right now. But what if you're joining a 2x4 to a piece of plywood or a 3/4 inch piece of wood? For instance, if you were doing like aprons on a table or something similar to that. Well, your first thought might be to set your jig at 1.5 inches because that's what the 2x4 thickness is, 1.5 inches thick. But you want to set it to whatever the thinner piece is that you're connecting to the thicker piece, because if you set it to 1.5 inches, you'll see I'll drill the 1.5 inch hole, I'll drive the 2.5 inch screw, which is what you would use there. It's going to stick out too much. In other words, too close to the edge, or it's going to break through. What you want is for it to be coming out the center of the 3/4 inch piece of wood, like you see this 1.25 inch screw. That's where you want it to come out, right? As close to center as possible. Another common mistake that beginners make when they're doing pocket hole joinery, especially if you're making a panel, such as, in other words, you're putting two edges together, you're gonna make a tabletop, something like that. There's a couple of mistakes here. The first mistake is trying to put two factory edges of boards together, side to side. What happens with that is they're usually not perfectly square. So when you put those two pieces together, it winds up pulling the boards up almost like a U shape or a V shape when you drive the screw or when you tighten the screw. What that's going to do over several pieces or several boards over a tabletop, it's going to make it bow. And it's going to be very, very difficult to get out. If it doesn't bow, it may twist. So one corner of your table will be touching the base and the other corner will not. Ask me how I know. I've made that mistake many times, or at least until I figured out what was going on. If you don't have a jointer, I have a video showing you tips and tricks on how to joint boards without a jointer, like using a level or even a jointing jig. It's very easy to do, but that's going to ensure you get a nice square edge on your board. And when you put that up against the other square edge that you cut, you're going to get a nice flat panel and you won't have that bowing and twisting. Another thing you may have noticed when I put these two pieces of boards together was when I started driving the screw, they came apart, or it pushed the other board away and then it pulled it back. That causes several issues. One, it causes misalignment. So the two boards are not perfectly flat because it pushed it away and then it pulled it back at a different plane when you pulled it together. One of the best tools you can buy when you get your pocket hole jig, and a lot of these can come in a bundle on our website, is if you get one with a face clamp. A face clamp can adjust to basically any thickness that you're going to be using with the pocket hole jig. And if I'm going to be clamping these two boards together, I want them to stay flat while I drive my screw. And that's where this face clamp comes into play, because it's going to clamp the two faces of the board, the two flat sides. Now these work like a vice grip. When you clamp it, it'll lock into place until you hit the little lever that unlocks it. But because these two heads pivot, it will basically take the shape that it needs to clamp those two flat. Now when you drive your screw, those two pieces remain flat because this is holding them flat and it's not pushing it away. When you're assembling tables like an end table or anything like that, and you have two legs you're joining with an apron, use clamps to hold those things together while you attach them. That will prevent things from moving out of the way as well, or being pushed away and then pulled back, which causes some inaccuracies and makes your stuff wompy jawed. You don't like that. Just use a couple clamps to hold all that together. Now, even though you're using pocket hole joinery, it is highly recommended, mandatory, as far as I'm concerned, that you use wood glue at every joint. That's going to help strengthen everything. The pocket hole screws are nice and they're strong, but joining or bonding those two pieces of wood together with wood glue is absolutely imperative. We're carrying Boss Dog wood glue on faithvalleytools.com now, so you can pick that up, clear dry, that's one I like, but you can pick up any color or any amount that you want. But it doesn't matter what type of wood glue, even if you go with Type Bond, Boss Dog, whatever, Gorilla, just use wood glue at every joint. It's a rule, my rule anyway. Outlaw rule number 302. Another common question is, can I use a regular screw versus a pocket hole screw? I don't recommend that because these pocket hole screws are specifically made to be used with the pocket hole. In other words, when you drill a hole with the pocket hole bit, it leaves a shoulder or a landing space for the head of the screw to catch. If you use a regular screw, those heads are actually angled and it will actually plow through that little shoulder and actually break through. So you want to use pocket hole screws whenever possible. Now there's a couple of different types of screws you want to look for when you're doing pocket hole joinery. First and foremost, if you're building outdoor furniture or any outdoor project at all, you want to use these coated screws. These are from Craig, blue coated screws, usually in the 2.5 inch length for 2x4s or 2x material. You'll want to use these because these other ones, while they're great, they're just not meant for outdoor use and they could rust. And if they rust, they break, and if they break, your project fails. So you want to make sure you use these coated ones for outdoors. Otherwise, there's only two other types of screws, one for softwoods or plywoods and one for hardwoods. And you'll notice the difference. The softwood and plywood screws are actually coarse thread. In other words, the threads are further apart. And the hardwood screws are actually self-tapping. You'll see almost a drill bit style tip on them, and then the threads are very fine, very close together. So you only use these for hardwood. Now there's some accessories that help you build better with pocket hole screws. First and foremost, the face clamp, as previously mentioned, I think it's a must-have. Now if you're doing cabinets, like you're building a miter station, or even like this workbench, or closet rebuilds, or anything like that, where you're using plywood to make 90-degree angles or 90-degree joints, this is one of the best inventions since the pocket hole jig. This is a 90-degree clamp. Has a post there that will go down into the pocket hole, and then the other side will clamp to the bottom of your project, and when it locks it in, it keeps it from moving. Before I had this, it was a pain in the rear to keep everything stable. This is a really, really nice tool to have, especially if you're doing cabinets. There's two other accessories here that I think are almost mandatory, especially if you're building a lot of pocket hole projects. First and foremost, this smaller bit. There's a 6-inch bit and there's a 3-inch bit. The reason you want that 3-inch driver bit is to get into those tight spaces. Sometimes you're building a smaller project, you just need to be able to drive that screw. And if that's not enough, you can also pick up this DeWalt right angle drill attachment. This goes into your driver, drill, or impact. Should be drill if you're doing pocket holes, but you can use your impact. And then of course the driver bit goes in there. This will really, really shorten that span that you're going to have with your drill or your driver, so you're able to get into those spaces. I use these all the time, especially on end tables, especially the smaller side tables, because when you can get into literally a space about 4 or 5 inches to be able to drive that screw, this is a lifesaver. The other accessory I highly recommend is a small parts organizer. Now this isn't a pack out. This is just a Milwaukee small parts organizer. I'll link to it in the description, as well as some very budget-friendly but well-made ones from our friends at Tay Tools. This is perfect because as you start building more and more projects, you're going to basically have 4 different screws. You're going to have an 1.25 inch coarse thread, probably an 1.25 inch fine thread for that hardwood we talked about. And then also you're going to have some outdoor screws, the blue coated ones, and then typically some 2 or 2.25 inch, 2 and/or 2.25 inch screws. So maybe 4 or 5 different screw types and sizes. So what you want is a way to sort those out and easily use them, and that's why I like these. Because it's really easy to take this out of the pack and take it to my project and use the screws that I need, and then take it and put it back away. and it keeps everything nice and organized. It's just one of those things that I didn't really think about when I first started getting into pocket holes, but having a variety of screws available and on hand is handy as a shirt pocket. And as far as accessories go, if you get the Masca M2 Pro pocket hole jig, this one, if you get this one, I would recommend picking up the mounting board. It keeps everything exactly where you need it and you don't lose things. And what's great about this board is it's magnetic. So your drill bits and your Allen keys and all of that magnetically snap in place and it prevents them from falling out. So if you have it turned upside down or anything like that, none of those bits and things like that fall out. And it's just handy to have because you can clamp this to the bench. It's just an all-around good accessory. As a beginner using pocket hole joinery, one of the most frustrating things that will happen is the screw will break through the backside of your project. So you're screwing two pieces together and it'll pop through. Why is that happening? Typically the reason is your jig isn't set properly or the stop collar on your drill bit is not set properly. What I like to do is be a little more conservative than the recommended guidelines from Craig or Masca. So the Masca jig has this turret that sits down in here to help you set your bit depth. First thing you'll do is set the depth of material or the thickness of material you're going to be using. In this case, 3/4 inch. We'll tighten that down. Now this turret has markings on it to let you know what thickness of material, so that 3/4 inch setting is right there. Drop the bit in. I actually turn it one more turn to the 7/8 setting and then tighten up my stop collar so that that depth is set. It makes it a little more conservative. It doesn't drill quite as deep. If I was doing 1.5 inch material, I would do the same thing. I would just be a little more conservative with it. So instead of touching out, I would just back it off a little bit, about 1/8 inch, and then set my depth collar. That will prevent those screws from breaking through almost every time, so long as you're doing it correctly. And that brings me to the next tip. Drill versus impact. I'm as guilty as anybody else is putting that driver bit in an impact because it fits. However, you can easily overdrive a pocket screw that will either strip it out, in other words, the threads will pull the meat of the wood out of there and you can't tighten it, you can't back it out, it's just stuck in there. That'll happen often, or you'll overdrive it, it'll pop through. It is highly recommended not to use an impact driver when driving pocket hole screws. Instead, use your drill and set the torque setting down so that it will basically stop itself from overdriving. If you do use your impact, just use it on the lowest setting versus the highest. But it's still recommended. Use the drill. Now the way a pocket hole works is really very simple. You're just drilling an angled hole for the screw to go in. But the way it works is kind of unique because of this drill bit. Now this drill bit, what it will do is drilling that, it's actually a 3/8 inch round drill bit on the biggest part, so you can use 3/8 inch dowels to cap those off or use plugs to cover those holes up if you need to. But the drill bit is where the magic happens because while it's drilling the hole, big enough hole so that the screw head can go down in, it also pilot drills a smaller hole, and because of that step design, it creates a ledge or a landing for that screw to grab a hold of once it starts tightening up. It just creates the perfect pocket for the screw. Power tip time. If you're going to be doing pocket hole joinery, get an extra bit. You'll thank me later. Because that very tiny tip on the end that does the little pilot hole drill tends to break off when you drop these bits, or if you knock your drill over, or any number of other things that's going to happen, or something falls on the bit. It happens all the time to me. I always keep a spare bit around because you don't want to get knocked out of commission because you don't have an extra bit. Pick up 2. Why not? Another common question I get on pocket holes is how to prevent tear out. So what you'll see sometimes is you'll see some frailing or frilling or splintering around that pocket hole. That's the word. One of the things that you can do to prevent that, or to help prevent that, it's sometimes almost impossible, but one of the ways is, especially on plywood, is if you drill with the grain. When you drill with the grain, you'll notice a really nice clean hole and keeping a sharp bit. Once these bits start getting dull, and if you drill dozens and dozens of pocket holes, it's just like a saw blade. It's going to get dull at some point. The edges of this bit will actually dull and cause a little bit of fraying. So have a sharp bit and try to go with the grain as much as possible. But even across the grain, it's still possible to get these nice clean holes if you have a sharp bit and take your time. Pocket hole joinery literally changed woodworking forever in a variety of ways. Cabinet makers use them all the time because they are so convenient, they're strong, they work great. It literally changed my life because I was able to take woodworking projects that I would have never been able to approach and make those projects and sell them for a profit for my woodworking business. And it really took me from nothing to something. And then I was able to turn that into more and more and more as the business grew, and I was able to make more and more projects. I think pocket hole joinery is one of the greatest inventions that ever existed for woodworking, and I think it's one of the best jigs ever made. Now we proudly carry the Maska pocket hole jig, the mounting board, the clamp, the screws. There's even bundles you can pick up that include everything you're going to need to get started with pocket hole joinery on our website, faithvaluetools.com. What's your opinion of pocket holes? Love, hate, don't care? Let me know in the comments. If you like this video, you got to check out those 13 pocket hole tips and tricks you can't live without. Click in that box, get you the big old virtual fist bump.